Hi friends, it's your pal Scott Garibay, and today we are going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons, and we're going to talk about the rest of the industry, and we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dagger Hearts, and we're going to talk about the OSR and the indies. All right, so for a long time, I have said, hey, Dungeons & Dragons is a real business. Within the last month, I've said Dungeons & Dagger Hearts is a real business. Those two are two real tabletop role-playing games that are really a business. But then I've said, listen, the OSR and the indie are not a real business. There really aren't people at scale. These aren't business. Here's a perfect example. Just this year, 2025, Fred Hicks from Evil Hat Games. These guys have had the Dresden Files, licensed RPG. They've had Fate. They've had huge successes. That company, he is the president and is still cannot get his own health care. Who has a company and they can't even get their health care for themselves? That's not a real business, in my humble opinion. And so what I've been saying is, we talk about the tabletop role-playing games as though they're a real industry, but it's not a real industry. And I want to give, but Scott, that's a huge, bold statement. Where's your receipt? That's valid. It's a valid question. Here's my receipt. This diamond debacle is receipts that the OSR and indies, that there is no tabletop role-playing game industry. There is no tabletop role-playing game industry. There is simply a bunch of amateurs that have leaped into a fancy garage sale, right? And this is what I'm saying, right? They are not managing business expectations. They are not actually navigating actual business problems, right? And Dungeons & Dragons is, and Critical Role is as well. But they couldn't do that if they weren't directly connected and protected by Dungeons & Dragons, right? And so one of the things is that, so this diamond debacle, right? So first of all, why should a major comic book distributor going belly up, why should that affect tabletop role-playing games? Well, the reason it did is because the OSR and indies have never been a real business. They are simply attaching on like a lamprey to larger industries, right? The OSR and indie never did the work to build their own diversified business model. CR just did it. They're the first, Dagger Heart is the first tabletop role-playing game in the world to have a sound, solid distribution model, right? And so you're like, well, wait, what's wrong with distributing with Diamond? Well, first of all, Diamond, there's been open discussion for 3 years that Diamond was going to go belly up. Anybody who got impacted like this by like Steven Glicker, he's like, oh no, everybody, Diamond went out of business. Duh. Like there's been open conversation for 3 years. Why did you have $50,000 to $120,000 in stock on consignment with them? And if you did, why didn't you do the paperwork to make sure you could get your stuff back, right? The way Professor Dungeon Master explained, right? And the reason why is he's not, in my humble opinion, he's not a real business, and he doesn't need to be a real business, right? You know what he could do? Oh, hey everybody, you need to solve my problem. I'm bad at business, so you need to buy my books right now and bail me out. Do we, right? Why not shift the entire industry to say, listen, none of this was a surprise. And also, this is literally a problem. Like Lorraine Williams dealt with this back in the mid-90s. None of this should have been a surprise to anyone, right? They had a return issue where they had thousands of books out with a distributor. That distributor could return them at times. This is different because it's consignment, right? But you were still at risk. If you're not building your own diversified distribution model with companies who have been doing this for a century or more, no one should believe that you can actually do real business. And no one should be putting your books in the same paragraph as real tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons and like Dagger Heart, right? Saying that like Shadow Dark is a respectable tabletop role-playing game compared to Dungeons & Dragons or Dagger Heart seems ludicrous now, right? Like you can't even find that thing on FBLGS shelves, right? Like, and there were literally months or years where you couldn't even order from the site, right? And so this is my entire point. We've reached a point where this has become ridiculous, right? I'm telling you, right? There is no tabletop role-playing game industry. There is a very real Dungeons and Dragons industry. There is now a real Daggerheart industry, right? They actually have the ability to distribute directly to Amazon. They do real business, and they sold out, right? Like they're at scale. People are excited about their product, right? They can't even reach demand, right? Which is fascinating, right? And it's not because they're arbitrarily hacking the demand, which I think a lot of OSRs and indies have done, right? And by not supplying directly to FLGSs, right? And so this is my point. We've reached a point where this has become ridiculous. Absolutely, there should be no sympathy, in my opinion, for any of these small publishers. None of this was unpredictable. There's been open discussion in every LCS in America for 3 years that Diamond was on the edge of going belly up. This is absurd, right? Also, there had already been this exact scare in the 90s. Anybody who read even a single history book would know if you don't build your own solid as a rock distribution chain, you can get slammed for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of liability, right? You've got to diversify your distribution chain. And putting tens of thousands of dollars books and having a razor's edge margin isn't going to work, right? And the reality, and here's the last part, right? When you fail at business and then you make your business deficiencies the problems of your buyers, that is not a real business. It is a fancy garage sale. So, hey, everybody who wants to, buy your OSR and buy your indie books, but don't ask for anybody else to come play your nonsense, because your nonsense is not real. It's just a fake garage band energy garage sale. You know, it's a garage sale, right? Like it's just a sale, you know, on the lawn, putting out, you know, and not even putting up tables, just laying crap on blankets on the ground, right? And I'm sick to death of talking about OSR and indie companies as though they're real. They're not, right? And I think this Diamond, you know, and they only rely on they don't do their own work. And D&D's been doing it for decades, right? When Gary lost control, he handpicked Lorraine. Lorraine built value for 11 years and then sold it to Magic the Gathering, who had hundreds of millions of dollars. Magic the Gathering was like, oh my gosh, we got a tiger by the tail. Let's sell to an actual global business. That global business built value into D&D for literally 2 decades. So big that an international conglomerate worth $500 billion was rumored for a month to be in talks to get D&D, right? Like D&D has done the work. They're at scale. And so to pretend that these tiny little garage sales are actual businesses and should be discussed in the same paragraph as Dungeons and Dragons is ludicrous, in my opinion. Every single word you just heard in this video is my opinion. Nothing more, nothing less. The important part is when I get to hear your humble opinion, when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking, subscribing, and have a fetch millennium.